gem bit. Once upon a time, amethyst was considered to be one of the five traditional cardinal gemstones, along with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. In fact, for thousands of years, because of this beautiful purple color, amethyst was only worn by royalty, kings, queens, emperors, and priests. Until about the 1800s, when they found a huge supply of it, the value of it decreased. It wasn't rare anymore. Something to think about in your own life. Discover the value of your story.
Increase. So this award lets me know that
Good morning. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Et toi? Ça va très bien. Ni hao. Hola. Ohio. Buongiorno. Bienvenue. Wan Ying. Bienvenidos. Benvenuta. And welcome. Welcome to another exciting episode of Gem Hunter Stories. My name is Barry B. Mixon, and I am a gemological storyteller. And each week, I get the phenomenal opportunity to take you on a journey. The places you've never been before. To hear stories you've never heard before. Each week, I get one magnificent moment to take you on a mental, physical, and spiritual adventure into the art, science, history, and magic. Gemstones, precious metals, and fine jewelry. And the reason why I do this is because I discovered that if I can take the same techniques, the same concepts, the same traits that I use in appraising a gemstone and use it as a template, as an inception point, as a bridge to help people, to empower people to discover the value of their own story. This is the 8th day of Black History Month. And I've been doing this show for 3 years now, over 3 years now. And at first, I want to thank all of you so much for supporting this channel, supporting this concept, and talking about value each week, especially on a Wednesday. I try to make Wednesday no longer hump day, to make it something beautiful. But in the last 3 years that we've been doing this show, I talk to you about stories. That I tell you all the time that nothing has value without a story. And now you're ready for the next level. Now you're ready to take that concept to the next level. Because what I've been teaching you and talking about is stories really in one dimension. Stories in the sense as far as just the direction that we're going. And it wasn't until really about a few weeks ago that I discovered something new about stories that I hadn't really thought about or realized. Robert, let me have my screen, please. For the last 3 years, I've been talking to you about what happens when you tell a story, how to put a story together, and what happens to you when you tell that story. The direction that you take comes out of when that story happens. That when I talk about as a man thinketh, if I'm talking about a person who literally created a story in his or her mind, and out of that story, reality happened. I talked about once upon a time, and I told you many times that once upon a time, the term is really a time machine, because what once upon a time does, it can allow us to go back. It allows us to go back to where we were once upon a time and to remind us of other successes and other things that we have had in our lives. And you can take that power and move forward. But it wasn't really until a few weeks ago that I began to think about what happens when you lose a story, when the story becomes lost, or even more importantly, even more tragic, is what happens when a story is forgotten. And I'm give you two examples of that today. This is the 8th day of Black History Month. Black History Month. And for those of you who don't live in the United States or Canada or England and Ireland, countries that celebrate Black History Month, I think in Ireland they celebrated in October. But in the United States, we celebrate Black History Month in February. Black History Month started February 1969. I was 8 years old. I know I'm dating myself. 8 years old. And it was created by a gentleman named Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson. He is considered, this is Carter G. Woodson here in his library. And Carter G. Woodson was the first African American to actually study the African diaspora, how African people whose origins and roots were in Africa, how they spread. Just like the Jewish diaspora, there's an African diaspora. So he decided that he wanted a way that, even though African Americans, or I keep saying African Americans, but people of African descent, people of color, who origins in Africa, even though they have touched all aspects of the world, their stories weren't being told. So he's considered the father of African American history. He went to Harvard, he studied, and his PhD was in the study of African people of African descent, the African diaspora, the only person who was doing it. I found a quote that I thought was really interesting, especially in regards to what I talk about all the time. If a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. That's what he wrote. And this is, we talk about 1920, 1930. This is what he began to understand. And what is he really talking about? He's really talking about stories. If a people lose their stories, if a people lose their traditions, then they risk being exterminated, not so much as human beings, but as people of that culture. And we all know different ethnicities, different cultures that have strongly kept their roots. The Muslim communities, the Jewish communities, the Native American communities, when you actually go to their the reservations, the places that there's strong cultural things. People from Latin American countries. You can never call a Cuban a Puerto Rican unless you're going to get into a fight. So what Carter G. Woodson understood the importance of stories, because as I teach you every week, nothing has value without a story. Let's just set that frame. So this is the 8th day of Black History Month, and Carter G. Woodson said that basically without that story, the people risk being exterminated. And I say every week, nothing has value without a story. So let's talk. So this is the month of February, and as I talked to you before, this is the month of amethyst. And as I told you before, amethyst is the purple variety of quartz. And I told you last week that quartz, this is amethyst. This is a beautiful piece of amethyst. And yes, you're going to be drooling all show. So just go ahead and get a napkin. Those of you, especially those of you who are either born in February, love purple, or this is your birthstone. Amethyst. And as I told you, amethyst is made up of silicon dioxide. That's the chemical composition of amethyst, silicon dioxide. And I told you that silicon and oxygen are the most abundant elements. 1, 2. Actually, 2, 1. So silicon, it comes in second, oxygen is number 1. And I told you, for those of you who are into chemistry, that this is the chemical composition of amethyst. Silicon dioxide. And for those of you, if that's too complicated or before your mind starts turning off, what I'm basically saying, let me give you the real technical term, sand. That's what amethyst is. Amethyst is sand. Every time you see sand on a beach, in a movie, but wherever, every time you see this, you should see amethyst. Amethyst is the rare aspect of sand. Sand is made up of silicon dioxide. That's what amethyst is made out of. Sand, amethyst. And because it comes from something like this is sand, which of course we know all the world, we understand how rare it is. How rare it is to get something that looks like amethyst. It has to, so what amethyst is the silicon dioxide with just a hint of iron and aluminum. That's what amethyst is. Has a hardness of 7, trigonal system, the way it's structured. And from a metaphysical aspect, amethyst is really the first gemstone that when people decide to get into the metaphysical aspects of gemstones, amethyst is usually the first. Amethyst is the stone of protection, purification, divine connection, because it's quartz. Those of you into metaphysics, you know how quartz is almost like the master gemstone. Quartz does so many things, and you think about just quartz's relationship with the earth. It is, and quartz, because it has that strong grounding aspects hitting like 3 or 4 different chakras, it is also helps you release addictions. Amethyst, actually the word amethyst means not drunk, because the Greeks believed that if you wore amethyst, you wouldn't get drunk. Amethyst. And so people, when they buy amethyst, you go in people's houses, you see this all the time. You see amethyst, you see the gemstones, you see the little geodes sitting on the butt. I have about, 3 or 4 of them hanging around the house. Okay, so amethyst is usually that. First of all, it's beautiful. Second of all, you see how at the bottom is still the quartz, but amethyst really is only purple. The cream rises to the top. That's what amethyst basically is as a gemstone. It's only that color on the upper parts of it. Amethyst. This is a geode, and amethyst comes in huge. I think the largest geode in the world is something like 1,000 pounds, 10 feet tall. Amethyst. But when people think about amethyst, they don't really understand what amethyst is. Amethyst is an old stone, one of the original stones. This is the breastplate of the high priest. Amethyst is in the Bible many times. It's in the Bible. In fact, this is amethyst. This should be, I don't know the way they have it. It's interesting. It should be this stone. Well, actually, it's this stone right here. Amethyst is the 9th stone on the high priest of Israel. Amethyst represented the 12 stones, the 12 Jewish tribes in Israel. I hope I'm getting this right. For those of you who know the Bible far better than me. But I did find a quote. Christina, this is for you. I found a quote in the Bible, Exodus 28:17 to 20, 19, 20, and 13. And if you don't have to read the whole thing, but if you look at the third paragraph, it said on the second row, there was an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. And in the third row, a liger, which is, I won't even go into what that is. It's a different name for it. An agate and amethyst. This is in the Bible. So when you talk about amethyst, amethyst is a cardinal stone. Amethyst used to be a cardinal stone. What is a cardinal stone? A cardinal stone is, there used to be 5 of them. 5 cardinal stones: diamonds, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and amethyst. So what a cardinal stone is the stone that holds the highest level of representation of what a gemstone can be. The color of that gemstone. That when you look at when a stone is designated as a cardinal stone, that means that's the stone that literally spoke to God. That's the stone. Those are the stones of heaven. And I always laugh at people when people get excited about diamonds. And they go, "Oh my God, diamonds, diamonds." And not that diamonds are not beautiful, but as far as cardinal stones, diamonds are low level. Diamonds is like the last one they got on. Diamonds have only been popular for about 200 years. But the whole rest of mankind were the other stones. When you look at, here's a diamond. Again, diamond is new on the scene. There's a ruby, and we've talked about ruby. We'll talk about rubies again when July comes along. But ruby was one of the incredible stones. You couldn't even be a king or a queen and not have a ruby because of the redness, because of the richness of color. Then you had sapphires. And again, sapphires are the sister gemstone to ruby. As I told you before, rubies have just trace amounts of chromium in it, and sapphire has trace amounts of iron and titanium, which gives it every color of the rainbow but red. So this is a sapphire. Then you got emerald. And we know that emeralds, we know how different people felt about emerald. And the thing about cardinal stones is really amazing is that every culture in the world understood that. Understood what a cardinal stone was like, what an emerald is. If you go to China, Asian countries, they understood emerald. In European countries, they understood emeralds, especially Spain. Spain is still not broke, but Spain doesn't have the level of, it's not at the same level of a lot of other European countries because of emeralds. And we'll talk about just the whole intoxications that Spain went through with gemstones. But emerald was really the one that took them over the top. And then there is amethyst. And before I go into amethyst, rubies and emeralds and sapphires had far more value than diamonds for a long, long time. But amethyst, oh my God, if you had amethyst back in the day, you had to be a king. You had to be a queen. Nobody wore amethyst. There are cultures that there were periods of time that if you wore amethyst, if you even had something that looked purple like that, something was getting cut off or you wasn't coming back home. It was illegal because amethyst, remember I said divine connection? That's how people felt about amethyst. Amethyst was the stone. Amethyst used to be the stone. In fact, I have a book somewhere here with Elizabeth Taylor's all her jewelry, and I was going through which I said she has to have amethyst. And there was a whole glossary of all her jewelry. And as I was going through, I looked through the index, and at least the last 7 pages was her jewelry. And it made sense because amethyst matched the colors of her eyes. If you ever saw Elizabeth Burton's eyes, she has violet amethyst colored eyes. So Richard Burton bought her that gemstone, and it was like buying it for a queen because that's what amethyst used to be. Look at the color. There's very few things in nature that's that color naturally. So amethyst was a cardinal stone. So you didn't have people just walking around with amethyst. They knew how special it is. Now you go into people's houses, you see this all the time. But back in the day, amethyst was truly special until they found a whole supply of it in Brazil, in Uruguay. And because of that supply, because there was so much amethyst, it was no longer rare because the masses could buy now. There was plenty of supply of it. And because of that, unfortunately, the value went down. The value went down. And think about that for yourself. See how you applied it to amethyst was the gemstone, a cardinal stone, along with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. And because there was an increase, a big, huge increase in the supply of amethyst, amethyst is no longer considered a cardinal stone. Even though this stone still had all those powers and the way people saw amethyst and all the ruling classes wore amethyst, it did not have that power anymore because it was now familiar. Remember the 5 things that make a gemstone a gemstone? Rarity is number 1. Rarity and beauty. Think about that. And now because amethyst, despite how spectacularly beautiful this ring is, just take a second, just look at this ring and go, wow. You feel like you can dive into that color. Imagine wearing that ring and just how rich you would feel. That's what amethyst does. Amethyst felt like lying in the arms of a beautiful woman. Just that protection, that divine connection. That's what amethyst was. And because of the increased supply in amethyst, it was considered semi-precious. Amethyst is now a semi-precious stone. Despite all the things, despite thousands of years, King Tut had amethyst. When they found his tomb, in his tomb was amethyst. And now that gemstone that King Tut had, and of course, all the people after that, Napoleon had amethyst. All the kings and queens of England and France had amethyst. But now, despite that background, despite what it is, amethyst is considered a semi-precious stone. Some of you guys have amethyst around the house or you're wearing it right now. And because it no longer was considered rare, because it was no longer rare, the story changed. The story of amethyst. Remember I told you what amethyst, how the story amethyst came about, that it was this beautiful, beautiful maiden who was just walking down the trail. Bacchus, the king, the god of wine, got mad at the mortals and said, the next mortal that walked down this trail is going to be eaten by my tiger. And Diana saw what was happening, changed this beautiful girl. When I say beautiful, of course, I never saw a picture of her, but that's how they described her. Not only just beautiful on the outside, but beautiful inside. Her spirit, again, purification. Her spirit was that. And Bacchus, seeing what he did, seeing the reason why she was no longer living because of something he did in this drunken state, he cried. One story says that he just poured wine over her, but the story that more prevalent is that he cried. He felt really bad about what he did, and his tears, being the god of wine, his tears flowed down and fell on top of this woman, changing her clear, crystalline body into a purple one. And again, at the top. So, and her name was Amethyst. That's the story of Amethyst. And despite that beautiful, romantic, loving story, the story changed. And because the story changed, it no longer had value. And most people don't know that. Most people don't know what Amethyst used to be. And my question always is, who made that decision? Who made that decision that something that used to be valuable is no longer valuable? Something that used to be priceless, something that only royalty would wear, and now that value, now a commoner can wear it. So does it change its value? Think about who you are. Think about your story. Think about the things that you used to do when you were the top athlete, or you had the best job performance, whatever. And now some time has passed, and now that story's changed. So that means your value changed. That's what Carter G. Woodson was talking about, getting people to understand the advancements, the things that people of color, people of the African diaspora had done all over the world. And he recognized that we needed time. There needed to be a special time where people could, all over the world, people could understand the contributions of people of color. Thus, Black History Month. Because Carter G. Woodson understands, as all of you now understand, is that nothing has value without a story. And I say that all the time for 3 years, but I never really truly understood it. Or at least I understand it on a whole different level because of what I've just learned recently. And I'm going to share it with you. Amethyst. That lost value because of what? A few weeks ago, a year ago, someone had sent me information about this person named the Mozart de Moi, the Black Mozart. And because you guys know how I feel about Mozart, I really thought, yeah, okay, somebody black who has similar music to both of us. That's what I thought. I was like, okay, cool, I'll look into it. And then it wasn't until pretty much a month ago, a friend of mine named Alan Lloyd sent me this information about this name. Joseph Bologne, le Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Joseph Bologne, le Chevalier de Saint-Georges. And when I read who this person is, when I read who this person was, I was astounded. I was absolutely astounded that this person existed. And I actually got angry at myself for several reasons. One, because as a gemologist, especially as a gemological storyteller, I should have known that he existed. It's kind of like the periodic table. What was his name? Mendeleev. Mendeleev figured out the elements of the periodic table before the elements were even discovered. And I knew that, and I should have already knew, based on just what I know gemstones can do, I should have already known that a person of color could be who Joseph Bologne, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Ladies and gentlemen, this man was magnificent. This brother was the baddest brother in Europe. In Europe, this man was awesome. Born, and his story speaks to everything that I say on the show. He was born on Christmas Day. He was literally a gift to the world. A gift from God on Christmas Day, 1745. He was born in Guadeloupe. He was a slave. He was a slave. I didn't even write that down because I didn't even want to even insult his picture with the word slave next to it. He was born to his mother was Senegalese, a beautiful woman named Nanon. And Joseph's father was a white guy. He was a white plantation owner named George. And George, and this is the interesting part. I tell you, gemstones are like, it takes you on an amazing journey. George was married. George was married to a woman named Elizabeth, and Elizabeth had a daughter who they also named Elizabeth. So here's George. George was married to a woman who had a child, a daughter, both of them named Elizabeth. And then George had an affair, a love affair with Nanon. And George and Nanon created Joseph. On a plane and on a plantation, a slave plantation in Guadeloupe. When George saw, I mean, he was obviously just absolutely in love with Nanon. And so when George when George had Joseph, he decided to give Joseph his name, which was totally unheard of, that a plantation owner would give his name to this young boy. And was again was unheard of. And when you start listening to the stories, you start thinking about all the, because of your own life, you know what he had to go through. So here is this black kid, okay, who was told by his father, the plantation owner, that I'm going to make you the perfect gentleman. I want my son to have everything in the world. So he raised Joseph. He raised him. He taught him. He took him down to hear music at the docks. He showed him different French culture and all different types of living and business and music. And by the time Joseph was about 8 years old, George decided that Guadeloupe couldn't offer Joseph the level of education that he deserved. So he took, here's the real brothers, you don't try this at home. He took his wife, his daughter, Nanon, and Joseph to France. And when you see it on the video, you see this little, of course, the little galleon ships that they used in the 18th century. And it wasn't like he was on the upper deck and she was on they were living close together. The wife, the mistress, the legitimate daughter, and of course Joseph. All the way to France. Long trip. I wouldn't want to be in the middle of that, like looking at him like, mm-hmm. Anyhow, France had just abolished slavery. But you know how it is. You may abolish slavery, but they still thinking like you're a slave. So Nanon and Joseph they didn't have a hard time. They had a difficult time, of course, because of the color of their skin, but because of who Joseph was, because Joseph got a job. He got a job with King Louis XV, and he was made a Chevalier. And we'll talk about what a Chevalier is when we get back on the other side. As you look at this beautiful amethyst, gold, diamond, and garnet ring that costs $26,500, always keep in mind that amethyst is a semi-precious gemstone. Discover the value of your story. All right, so we're back. So George, the father, was now made a Chevalier. Okay, so what? And it's going to be a movie about this. This is the exciting part. I couldn't even wait. The movie's going to come out in April of this year, called Chevalier. Okay, that's George, and with a violin in his hand. And when I got to see, I don't get any kickbacks from the movie, but the movie is going to be unbelievable when you understand what this man did, who this man was. So first of all, what is a Chevalier? And you have to say it. We're going to speak je parle français. Oui? D'accord. So what is a Chevalier? A chevalier is a knight. That's what a chevalier is. A French knight. Actually, I met one here, right here in France. He was given that title, but I was amazed. Like, oh my God, you're a real knight. So that's what he is. So think about it. Here it is. His father became a chevalier, a knight. This is actually real suits of armor that I had an opportunity to work with in the Museum of Natural History, Museum of Fine Arts in Cleveland, Ohio. And so this is not the kind of suit armor that George or Joseph wore. This is a little earlier, but a knight. Just wanted to show you what knights used to do. So think about it. You're a knight. So his father became a knight. His father became basically the right-hand man of Louis XV, and that gave George, the father, an opportunity to give Joseph everything. So he took Joseph to the absolute best boarding school in France. And you have to, if you haven't been to France, anytime France is not like the United States. You know, United States, you might have stuff that's nice and 4-star, but when you go in France, anything that's 4 or 5 stars, it's like extraordinarily different. And that's the kind of school he went to. And of course, you know, he was the only black kid in the whole school. And so his program was he would go to school, reading, writing, mathematics, music, cultural things. And in the afternoon, he practiced fencing. And Joseph Bologne, Le Chevalier de Saint George. And the reason I keep saying his name is because just saying Joseph almost doesn't get it. You have to understand. This man was the greatest swordsman in all of France. He wasn't even a man yet. He was a kid. By the time he was 15, he was beating everybody. Everybody. And the school he went to was one of the best boarding schools, if not the best boarding school in France. And his instructor was the man named Lavoisier. I love that name. Can you imagine your last name saying Monsieur Lavoisier? He was a master fencer, and he couldn't believe what George was. He couldn't believe his athleticism. It was like George was just the Michael Jordan, the Tiger Woods, the Jackie Robinson, everybody, the Walter Payton, everybody, all the black athletes that you know, LeBron James just broke Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record. That's who Joseph was. He had people coming from everywhere just to fight him. It was just like, and he took him on. He had 69 fights, and he only lost one. He only lost one. This brother here was good in, first of all, he was the quintessential example of tall, dark, and handsome. He was tall, he was lanky, he was musculature. He was like a real Black Panther. He was just, his movements was just like lightning fast. He'd cut you before you even saw the blade move. And he was so good that this guy, I forgot his name. This guy, Chad Picard. Picard said, "Oh, you know, I'm going to go down and I challenge that Lavoisier's mulatto." To say mulatto in the 18th century, 17th century was like the N-word. So George, the father, who was a knight who worked with the king, was like, nah. And he was very ambitious. He was like, nah, you're not going to insult my son like that. You're not going to call my son that. So he said, Joseph, yeah, daddy, you need to fight him. And Joseph didn't want to do it at first. Joseph was like, come on, dad, I don't want to, I got to fight this guy. He was like, you know what he called you? He called you a half-breed. He called you a mulatto. You got to take care of that. Joseph was like, all right, got to do it. So, and it was literally this whole cultural war. It was like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. It was like that. Actually, it was Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston. You know, when Muhammad Ali was talking about, I'm going to beat him and all this stuff. And when he beat Sonny Liston, that was his first major fight. That's what Joseph had to fight this guy, Picard. He beat him like he stole something. I mean, like, when you read what he did, he didn't even have a chance. And this guy was like all that. And he was like that everything. He, when you read what he had done, he was a master swordsman. He was a master equestrian. And again, you're thinking swords are like what guns are in the United States now. Everybody in France had if you were somebody, you had a sword. In fact, they didn't even, if you were a pope, you were kind of judged going up the way by your swordsmanship. So he was great. He was a virtuoso in swords, in equestrian. They said that he could take a coin. You could take a coin, flip it in the air, and he would shoot the head of the coin right center mass. And this is what those old kind of flintlock guns. That's what he would do. He even had a boxing match. Joseph Bologne, le Chevalier de Saint George, was truly a knight in every way. And he was such a knight that they literally gave him, when he graduated from the school, they gave him the title of Le Chevalier. So he was a Le Chevalier de Saint George in his own right. He was the coldest dresser. He dressed what fashion is, what you understand fashion coming from France is. He's one of the guys that started it. This is who he was. And he, in this meantime, he could also play music. He competed in this basically like, I think of it as the Apollo Theater, amateur night. Well, in France, the amateur night wasn't amateurs. It was called the amateur, the concert de amateur. And he was a part of that. And he just walked on the stage and just blew everybody away playing his violin. That's why you see him in his pictures, you see him with either a sword or violin in his hand. And they didn't even know he could play violin. They had no idea. So think about, he practiced or was in his head so profoundly that he was able to just pick up a violin and just play. And because he was so fast with his hands, he could play violin in ways that other people can't play. I played violin when I was in high school, and I loved violin, but I couldn't get, those of you who play violin, I couldn't get into the lower levels of the keyboard, and I certainly couldn't, I forgot what they call when you're vibrating your hand. There's a term for it, but I couldn't get that, and that's why I stopped. But had I understood who Joseph was, I might have kept playing. And that's my point. How is it? That's the thing that you hear my voice. How is it that a man this accomplished, this man knew Mozart? In fact, people say, and he doesn't really have this as an official title, but people call Joseph Bologne le Chevalier de Saint George, they call him the Black Mozart, Mozart Noir. He was 10 years older than Mozart, first of all. Second of all, because he was African, because he was Black, he couldn't, in the laws in France, you could be free, but you couldn't own no property. So he just kind of like lived in different people's mansions and palaces. And one of those times he was bunking, as I love my friend Seth Cawley said, Mozart was couch surfing on one of the monarch's houses where Mozart lived. And Mozart and Joseph worked together. And Mozart actually, even though Mozart was who Mozart was, you have to understand that Joseph did everything that Mozart did, and then some. And then some. The swordsmanship, the horsemanship, the style, the fashion. He was a fashion palette. Women loved him. He was the ultimate ladies' man. Even Marie Antoinette was liking him. He taught Marie Antoinette for a short amount of time, because Marie Antoinette was actually a musician. I didn't know that. But the thing that keeps resonating for me was, how is it that I've been studying, I've been a part of African American Black History Month for 52 years. 52 years. I've gone to school. I've done, we learned about Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, all these, Martin Luther King, of course. But how is it that I didn't know about Joseph Bologne, Le Chevalier de Saint George? How did I not know him? And that's when it dawned on me what Carter G. Woodson was trying to do, and how dangerous it is to forget someone's story. When I say to you each week at the end of my show, discover the value of your story, or discover the value of someone else's story, this is what I'm talking about. How empowered would people that look like me, how would I have felt knowing that once upon a time there was a black man who did what he did, that he was a slave and he rose up to be as John Adams, the second president of the United States, said, he wrote it down that Joseph Bologne, Le Chevalier de Saint George, was the most accomplished man in the whole of Europe. See, Mozart didn't get popular until later on. He had attitude problems. In fact, he was jealous. I read some report that he was jealous of George's Saint George's popularity. And what they found is when you listen to Joseph's music or his earlier pieces, it sounds a lot like what Mozart wrote later on. And they understood that Mozart, and they say he stole it. I like to say that they collaborated. I don't know if they were friends, but they played. Joseph played his violin with Mozart. So some of Mozart's pieces, especially there's 4 of them, that you could truly hear the influence of Joseph Bologne, Le Chevalier de Saint George. And my question to me is, how is it that I have lived all these years, 52 years of Black history? I love Mozart. I just finished winning an international speech contest using a line from the movie Amadeus, and I had no idea that this man existed. I was actually, at first I was angry. I was angry that, like, how could I have been out of knowing this story? How did I not know this story? We talk about Malcolm X all the time. Not Malcolm X, sorry, Martin Luther King all the time. And that's fine. But when you had a human being that existed like this, when you have a movie that came out in 1984 called Amadeus, it won 8-10 Academy Awards. How do you do that and not celebrate Joseph? How do you not celebrate him? There's not even a whole lot of pictures of him. This is one of the pictures of him that one of his good friends who actually started one of the reasons the French Revolution started, or one of the people who actually agitated the French Revolution. He wanted a picture of him just because. The King of England wanted to, I think it was King George IV, who wound up being King George IV. He wanted a picture of it because he was so impressed with who this man was. And yet, never heard of him before. Not only did this brother was a master swordsman, a virtuoso in the violin, he was actually a conductor. He conducted the Paris Opera House, and some of the most popular pieces ever that come out of it was under his direction. And of course, his color got in his way when they were trying to get him to be the lead conductor and director of the Paris Opera House. They were like 3 of the singers there who were white. 3 women was like, no, I can't work with him. I can't possibly take orders from a mulatto. And why that's important is begin again, discover your what was going through him when he knew he was the best. There was no question. Even in the trailer, you see about him looking at, I don't know who the character was. It was probably one of those women. And he says, I'm the best. What do you do with that? What do you do with that when you're so talented that you can not only write music, not only conduct music, not only play music, you're a master swordsman, a master equestrian, you're the best dresser in France. Just take a second to think about that. Think about going to Paris Week, which they just had a few weeks ago. Think about going to Paris Week and you are the best dressed, you're the best dresser, the best dressed in the whole entire city of Paris. Think about going to the Grammys. It just happened the other day, and you're the best dressed person on that red carpet. That's who he was. And when the French Revolution started, he was so popular. He was so well known. They said, why don't you use that power to fight? The French Revolution was about equal rights, and George wanted equal rights. He knew his mother was a slave. He knew how he was treated. Joseph had assassination attempts against him, 4 of them. And because he was so cold with a sword, he took them on. There was a story where he went to a party, like 4 or 5 guys jumped him. And because he had a walking stick with him, he just took them on, had a couple of bruises, and he went to the party. That's who this man was. And yet, most of us don't know his story. He was a colonel in the French Revolution. A colonel in the French. In fact, he led a battalion of mostly Africans who were from the Americas. This detachment was called the L'Homme American. Something. It was basically saying men of America. I'm not talking about America. It wasn't the States. He talked about from the Americas. So people from the islands, the Caribbean islands, people from Middle America, Central America, people from South America, they were all part of his battalion, and he fought. He won all his battles. And yet, they still arrested him because he was close to the monarchy, and they knew he was close. They arrested him. They told him, said, what's the charge? He was like, no charge. We just arrested you. He formed up, before he got arrested, he formed up an army in this little town called Lille. And it was so amazing as I was reading the story, because the second city I ever went to, where I went to France, was Lille. So these are my pictures. This is what Lille looks like today. And to know that once upon a time, literally in 2016, I was in this city, and I was in the place where Joseph Bologne, Le Chevalier de Saint George was there, and yet I didn't see statues of him. I didn't see any information of him. How wonderful would it have been for that trip? And it was an unbelievable trip in the first place, just to be there. Lille sits right on the border, right between Belgium and France. Literally, Belgium's like 20-minute walk. Okay, 20-minute ride. Belgium's right there. The wine, the cheese. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. But imagine how I would have felt had I known that someone who looked like me, this was his city. This was his town. When I thought about Lille, when I first went to Lille, I went to Lille in Christmas time. It felt like Santa. The first thing I always tell people about Lille is it looks like Santa there for real. Santa doesn't live in the North Pole. He lives in Lille. Some of these buildings goes back to when St. George was there. This is the carousel. The carousel wasn't there, but this is the flavor of this city. So here is a man. Look at the similarities, because that's what we do on the show. Amethyst is a gemstone that comes from sand. Whereas Joseph was the son of a slave. And they both had to go through different things to become what they are. They both had to develop. This is more pictures of Lille. Beautiful, enchanting, just an intoxicating, enchanting city. This is their chamber. So Amethyst has to go through a process to become Amethyst. Joseph had to become. His color was as a result of what was inside of him, not only just on a molecular level as far as the melanin in his skin, but his show, his who he was as a result of what his father put inside of him, just like a gemstone. Silicon dioxide, sand, if you put it together, if the rare occurrence of bringing sand together where it becomes a crystalline structure, and if that sand is if that sand has a touch of iron and then it or an aluminum, then it becomes amethyst. It becomes what you're looking at. It becomes, and this is the importance of understanding your story, because it's not what you manifest, what you see is as a result of what's inside of you. So today, what I want you to do, again, to take time to think about, to look at his story. Definitely go see the movie. And I'm going to do another show with some people who've seen the movie, who know even more about music. But use this show as an example of wherever you are in your life, whatever you've gone through, whatever trials and tribulations you've gone through, that you can overcome. You can become anything you want to become the moment you begin to recognize your story, because it's from that story you will begin to understand and discover your value. So again, my name is Barry B. Mixon, a gemological storyteller, and please take the time to discover what you've done, how you relate to the community, how you interact with the light, and appreciate the value of your own story. So until next week, au revoir, à te tella, voila. Here's a gem bit. Once upon a time, amethyst was considered to be one of the 5 traditional cardinal gemstones, along with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. In fact, for thousands of years, because of this beautiful purple color, amethyst was only worn by royalty, kings, queens, emperors, and priests. Until about the 1800s, when they found a huge supply of it, the value of it decreased. It wasn't rare anymore. Something to think about in your own life. Discover the value of your story. Nothing has value without a story. That is the essence of Professor Barry's Science Emporium. Ladies and gentlemen, science is all around us. It is in everything that your child does. It is in everything that your child wants to be. So what I do is take their stories and incorporate it into the stories of the lessons that I want to teach in science and history. And I guarantee that at the end of the lesson, your child will either love science or have a much greater appreciation for science and history, because they will come to realize, as thousands of children have come to realize all over the world, is that at Professor Barry's Science Emporium, everything is science. I hope I have the opportunity to work with your child. Professor Barry's Science Emporium, where everything is science.